So Dr. Ewan St John Smith, today the talk is about the physiology of the naked mole rat. Firstly, what makes the naked mole rat so interesting scientifically?
I'd almost answer that with what doesn't make them interesting. Virtually every facet of their biology and physiology that people have looked at has been very different to most other mammals. They're cold-blooded, they're eusocial, so they have a queen in charge of the colony. They don't feel chemically induced pain, they don't get cancer, they live forever. Well, not forever, but 30 plus years. So there's a lot of things that make them highly unusual.
Okay, let's talk about one of those things. So living for, 30 plus years probably?
So the record holder is 32 and a half years, but she was an adult when caught. So we're going for 30 plus years is a good age for a naked mole rat. And bear in mind, they're the same size. They're basically a large mouse. And your average mouse, if it's looked after very well, will die 3 to 4 years. So same size animal. And normally there's a very good correlation between size of animal or mass of the animal and longevity and the age that the animal lived to. So they're really outdoing what they should do when you just look at them.
What should they be doing in terms of life expectancy?
3 to 4, 5 years at a push. So really to get over 30 plus is very unusual. You would not have predicted that by just looking at them.
Speaking of looking at them, they do look very unusual. They don't have any noticeable fur apart from whiskers, let's say. Surely they should be prone to things like skin cancer because with the sun coming down on them in the day, I know that they live underground, but surely they should be very prone to something like that, yet you say they're immune.
Well, yes, to deal with the sun aspect, they are virtually, as far as anyone knows, they're purely subterranean. It's known that they must come above ground at some point because you haven't got one colony, you've got several colonies, and the main way that will have started is by an animal coming above ground and disappearing off elsewhere. But they're not really exposed to sun, and no one's really looked to see if, under laboratory conditions, if you expose them to UV radiation, what would happen. Because you're right, they don't have fur, and if you don't have fur, you'd expect the skin to be damaged by UV radiation. But that hasn't been looked at.
Is it true that there is no example of a naked mole rat having contracted cancer ever?
So there's two ways of looking at this. One is that animals that die under laboratory circumstances that are unusual, people have looked and just observed, they've never seen cancer. But more tellingly, I think, is a colony at a zoo in Illinois in the States, they just retrospectively looked at all the post-mortems they'd made of animals that died in their colonies. There's 138 animals across, I think, about 15 years. And again, they'd found no evidence of tumour growth in any of those animals. So either the mole rat never gets cancer, or if they do, it's such a small amount of animals that it just hasn't been seen. But I'd go for they do not get cancer.
Which is unusual. Is there anything that leads us to know the reason why that might be?
I think we're beginning to get there. There's been a few studies that have come out that have suggested that there's more control on cell growth. So the cells go through cycles to proliferate, and it seems that there's more breaks on this system within the naked mole rat. And there was a paper last year which suggested one possible circulating, let's call it a hormone, it's not really, but a substance in the body that may be able to control this. But there's still a lot of experiments to be done to really look at the detailed mechanisms of how they're cancer resistant.
How much do we really know about them? Because you say almost everything's interesting about them. In terms of the scale of research that's been done so far, would you say you're kind of halfway to understanding the physiology of them, or less than that, more than that?
Definitely less than that. I think the genome being published in 2011 was a big breakthrough, because now we can see that this animal is over 90% at the genetic level similar to a mouse or a rat. It has all these very strange phenotypes. But I think until the last few years, the majority of researchers are concentrated on, or not concentrated, they've observed phenomena, and these have been published. And I think there's only a few studies that have really begun to find a molecular mechanism, really at the physiological level, of why this has come about. And we, for example, found that the naked mole rat doesn't find acid a painful stimulus. So normally it causes a burning sensation, and the animal doesn't respond to acid as a noxious stimulus. And we managed to identify a particular protein expressed by naked mole rats' pain-sensing neurons, which results that acid doesn't excite these pain-sensing neurons, but actually acts as an anesthetic. So that's an example of where we found these started with the odd behaviour and then really worked down to the physiology and then the real molecules at the other end of it. So I think that will become more and more apparent as more and more people think, well, actually, there's some weird physiology here. Let's find out what's really the basis of that.
Do they experience any pain at all, or is it just acid-based?
But I think this is a key thing to correct, because if you look on Wikipedia and lots of things, they talk about naked mole rats, they never get pain, and this is wrong. There's one main paper which we published in 2008 characterising their basic responses to stimuli, and their responses to mechanical stimuli. So if you poke the animal with a certain amount of pressure and you look at how long it takes to remove its paw, this is the same between mice and mole rats. And the same was observed if you shine a warm light on the paw of the animal, they remove it at the same latency from when you shine the light as a mouse does. So clearly there are specific stimuli that they're not responding to and others that they respond to perfectly normally.
And once we understand that it happens, how can we translate that into something useful for humans? Is that the general aim?
Well, of course, I think if you're going to, it's obviously interesting in the animal itself, but the main aim has to be to leverage the odd physiology in the mole rat to find out more about how our physiology works and so work on from that. And I think that the cancer is one really good example of this. This is an animal that doesn't get cancer. Cancer has a massive impact on humanity. So we can find out how this animal doesn't get cancer. We should be able to identify specific molecules that control this lack of cancer getting, and hopefully be able to make some druggable targets to be able to find new ways of preventing cancer or turning back cancer in humans. I mean, that has to be the main goal, I think. There are other 21 species of African mole rats, and they're very different to all of them. All of the others are warm-blooded, they're furry, so the naked mole rat is just very, very strange.
Do we know why they're very strange? Is it an evolutionary thing? Is it their habitats?
I mean, clearly they have to be, the adaptations they have to their environments have to be, evolution works through adaptation, and I think that the fact, for example, that they are naked and cold-blooded. So obviously most mammals have fur as an insulating mechanism. And these animals live permanently underground in Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and the temperature difference between night and day, summer and winter, is 2 degrees. And I think you can sort of look at evolution as being a bit like playing rugby. If you're the rugby team with a ball and you're not really doing anything with it, the referee will say, use it or lose it. And it's sort of the same with the mole rat evolving. If you don't need to thermoregulate, you don't need to control and invest energy in regulating your temperature, then why bother? So I think certain things will have been lost because they weren't needed. And others, why they don't get cancer, we've really no idea why they don't.
And what are your hopes for the future of research in this particular field, discovering other things that are unusual about them?
I think we've already got a fair list of things that are unusual. I think we now need to work out why that is. The things that I'm most interested in is one, the cancer resistance. Secondly, is they have a very large resistance to hypoxia, so low oxygen conditions. Most mammals, their brain activity will cease if they don't get oxygen. The naked mole rat can keep on ticking over with very low oxygen, and similarly with high carbon dioxide concentrations. Again, this is an adaptation to living underground, lots of animals breathing, no fresh air. You have to be able to live in low oxygen, high carbon dioxide concentrations. So although that sounds a bit odd, if you think of people who have strokes, you're ablating that oxygen delivered to the brain, and then you're suddenly giving them lots back again. So if we can understand how the naked mole rat is resistant to this lack of oxygen inducing damage, there's also, that's just an example of another clinical condition where we could learn something from the naked mole rat.
Dr. Ewan St John Smith, thanks for talking to us.
Very welcome, thank you.
So when the females become a queen, what happens genetically to them so that they become fertile? Because presumably the DNA doesn't change.
Every female is capable of being a reproductive female. It's just they're not. I think that the main hypothesis is that the behaviour from the queen is causing hormonal changes in all the other females. That's just meaning they don't sexually mature. So they've got all the DNA to become sexually mature, but you have to remove that hormonal repression. It's sort of the same. I know nothing about puberty in humans, as it were, but humans become sexually mature. But you're capable of it. You have to sort of go through this process. I think the naked mole rat, this process is just on hold until you remove this repression, and then they can develop. Because every female is capable. It's just they don't normally get the chance.
Does the queen live as long as the non-breeding naked mole rats?
I've had a colony where the queen was fine, gave birth, was fine for 3 years, and then there was a fight. And she was going to lose that fight. If the queen doesn't stay active as a queen, presumably in terms of bullying the other animals, then if the other females think they have a chance, they'll give it a go. So we had a putsch against our queen. She sort of got through round 1. We had to split the animals up. And the next day, one of the other animals had a go, and we really had to remove the queen. And then we had to end up with 3 different colonies because the animals had just sort of gone into different groups. So if the queen is efficient and does her job well, it's a job for life if you can hold on to it. It's not generally that there's a lot of aggression, but it's not unusual. And it could just be a matter of being in captivity, where obviously, you try and keep the animals as close to their normal environment as you would, but it isn't. So it could just be a matter the queen doesn't act as a normal queen because she's in an unusual environment. So it could be that in the wild, these challenges to the queen don't happen. A naked mole rat, all of them get sort of past 25. It's very unusual to have a young... If they get through the initial few months that's dangerous for any mammal, if they get through that, they've got a very good chance of making it all the way. And the other strange thing is that I forgot to mention, and perhaps should, is not only does the queen keep giving birth to large litters as she gets older, but they do something quite strange, which is if you have a mouse, and your mouse will give birth, and somewhere between 7, 6, 10 pups will be born. And the first time your new naked mole rat queen gives birth, she'll also give the same sort of number because they're about the same size. And then something very strange happens. That their vertebrae in their spine, at the lower end of the spine, elongate. And so her womb gets larger, and the record is 28 babies in one birth. So this is another reason how they can probably sustain large colonies, is because you're cold-blooded, their gestation period is 75 days. It's a lot longer than in a mouse. But if you're producing, as it were, 20 units a time, you can maintain this. So they get this elongation that allows a greater production. So they stay healthy and they do their job.
Do they have any predators?
As far as I'm aware, there's certainly no animal that only preys on naked mole rats. That's a definite no. The strange thing is that if you take a mouse on your hand and the mouse is a bit agitated, it will probably urinate or try to bite you. If a naked mole rat gets a bit worried, it won't do either of those. It will run backwards very, very quickly, and it will be up your shirt sleeves before you know what's happened. So if you're living in a tunnel, it makes sense to run backwards quickly, and they can do this very efficiently. So that makes sense that there are obviously things at times where they try to grab them. There aren't many snakes as far as I know where they live, because you can imagine a snake going in there. So you can imagine a circumstance where a bird could be watching and could come and get it. There's no animal that, I think it would be a chance grab rather than a technique per se.
Is there aggressive competition among the males?
Not really, no. It's all driven by the queen. The breeding, so in a colony, depending on the size, there'll normally be a maximum of 3 males to 1 queen, as in the breeding males. And they will be dominant. So again, if they meet in a tunnel, other than with the queen, they will be on top of the other animal. So you've sort of got a hierarchy of queen, breeding males, everybody else. You can also see the dominance not just in terms of running through tunnels, but if you give them food that they really like. And so when naked mole rats were first caught and brought to the lab, there was a bit of a problem because they don't have hair. And if it's not humid, their skin starts cracking. So people went through trials to work out which moisturiser you could use to moisturise your mole rats. Which sounds funny, but if you've got 600 animals, the idea of picking them up and giving them all moisturiser is a bit of a problem. No one really understands what they're lacking in the diets we're giving them compared to what they get in the wild. But if you give them, there's a South African breakfast cereal called Pro Nutro, which when you mix it with water is quite day-glow yellow, and it's very rich in lots of vitamins, and it's very sweet. And they go nuts for this. You mix a little bit with water. If the animals, let's say the cage is as big as this room, if I put it in this corner, they'll be running here in seconds, and that will be queen, breeding males. They'll get to that before the others. So the breeding male has a role, but I think they've got it. I think they've got the best role. They're never going to be attacked. They don't have to really work very hard, and they'll always get the food first. So they're a good, cushy life.
Just wondering, it sounds like these colonies are sort of very genetically inbred, or is there a way of getting some sort of transfer from another colony in terms of a male migrating? Or...
Well, yes. I mean, there was an Attenborough documentary 2 years ago, I think. And they showed footage of a naked mole, because it's about this, how do they breed? And they showed this naked mole scuttling above the ground to find its partner. That was filmed at Queen Mary University, London. There's never been seen above ground. So yes, that would be the way to get your genetic diversity. There's a theory that occasionally you get what's called a dispersor morph. So it's been observed that certain animals caught in the wild and in the lab have a lot of fat, a lot of neck fat, and it's thought that these are the animals, and it's been observed by behaviours in the lab, again, not in the wild, that these animals are capable, because they've got bigger fat reserves, to potentially go off and find an animal to breed with. But you're talking this massive area of landscape, an animal with a bit of fat's going to wander off and by pure luck find another one? I mean, something like that must happen, or 2 animals at the end of the network of tunnels just think, well, if we turn left, we've got it, we're on our own. I mean, it's not really understood how new colonies do start, but just a final note on the inbreeding, they are exceptionally inbred, and it's a massive problem in the laboratory environments, because occasionally you'll get a disease outbreak, and normally you can deal with this because you've got genetic variation, and some animals will resist. And this is true in naked mole rats as well, but the amount of animals, I can't remember exactly what the virus was, it was in a South African university, and if you looked at the percentage of each animal species that was in this unit that died because of virus X, it was huge amongst the naked mole rats, comparatively speaking. And of course, it could be this particular disease was really good at killing naked mole rats, but I think the fact that they're really inbred, low genetic variation, is not going to do your immune system any favours.